Welcome aboard. Thank you for choosing to fly Riverbend Airways. We know you have a choice in your spiritual journey, and I'm glad you have chosen to join us on this journey. So sit back, relax, get comfortable in your seat, and I just want to let you know from up here on the flight deck that you can bring all the baggage you want. You can carry it all in. We have no overhead bin space. You can just leave it laying around, and just be careful that when you come in with your baggage, you realize everybody around you has baggage, so you might trip over somebody else's baggage, or they might trip over yours, but there are no limitations. You can bring it all. We're actually hoping that you would leave some of it here. But I want to let you know that we're planning on having a smooth flight, and we anticipate no delays whatsoever, and we're glad that you have decided to settle in and join us on this adventure, on this journey, on this flight to a place where many of us have never been. We are taking a journey into the Tao of Jesus, and we've been cleared for takeoff. But before we head out, would you pray with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, that you would use your words spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to challenge us to be in awe. May we see your majesty more clearly than perhaps we have seen it in a long time. May we leave here more in awe of you. Pray that for myself and for my family, and for all of us here. For I ask that in Jesus' name, amen. I was raised and I was trained to be a modernist. Now, when I use the term modernist or a modern man, I'm talking about a philosophy, a way of looking at the world. When I talk about modernism, I talk about a worldview that says the world makes sense, the world has order. That if I am unsure of something, with enough investigation, with enough testing, I can prove out what is true and what is false. It is a basis of looking at the world analytically and empirically. The world ultimately makes sense if we look closely enough, if we dig deep enough. I was raised in this modern mindset that said every cause has an effect. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, that choices have consequences, that there are laws in nature and laws in society, that if you break those laws, you have to calculate what will happen when you violate them. The world is kind of ordered and logical and makes sense. It's a world that I am very comfortable in. I wouldn't be surprised if many of you wouldn't say, well, I'm a modernist too. I like a quid pro quo kind of world. I like a world of guidelines. I want to know who the good guys are and the bad guys are. I don't like a lot of mystery or uncertainty that makes me anxious or uncomfortable. And for those of us who are modernists, the world has passed us by. See, on my way to getting my AARP card, the world changed around me. And there were two things that changed in my journey to old age. In my journey into my 60s, the first thing that changed was the world around me changed. See, I was born on the tail end of the industrial age. My parents and grandparents were born in the middle of the industrial age. The culture of humanity had shifted after millennium of existence from an agrarian-based society into an industrial-based society. This was pretty much most of the 18th and 19th and into the 20th centuries. The commodity of success and wealth for hundreds of years was goods and services. There were things that you made, things that you could do, things that you could provide, and you could exchange those goods and services for life-providing sustenance. And the world operated in an economy where tangible things had great value, had the greatest value. This went on for millennium or for a few hundred years, into which my parents and my grandparents were born. I was born as the culture began to shift from an industrial society to an information society. Perhaps that shift has been no more dramatic than it has been in the last 50 years or so. We have become a society where the measure of success, the currency that is exchanged between human beings, is not necessarily goods and services as much as it's information and knowledge. We have attached value, and even the highest value, to certain things, to knowing certain things and having the right kinds of information. And this has changed radically how people experience life on this planet. 250 years ago, you could have easily grown up in America and literally spent your entire life in the same town. It would have been possible for you to grow up in a rural setting where you never ever met anyone who you didn't know personally, where your entire world was made up of your experiences in your local community. This allowed for a very ordered and recognized way of life. People slotted into boxes, and the unknown world out there was limited by our stereotypes and our prejudices and our presuppositions. It didn't matter because we didn't experience it or encounter it. But in the last 50 years or so, the amount of information we have about the experiences of others, our ability to enter into their points of view, the volumes of information that are available to us at our fingertips changes how we see the world, how we experience the world. And the challenge is that some of those presuppositions, some of those prejudices, some of those stereotypes have been completely eroded or wiped out because we now see the world in a different way. We have more information, we have more knowledge. And as knowledge and information exponentially increase, so does the mystery of the world that we live in. So does the uncertainty of the world that we live in, because the answers that used to suffice aren't good enough anymore. The rules that used to guide our life have been broken, and new things have happened that have actually improved our existence by breaking those rules. The stereotypes have been torn down, because now we can see people's experiences firsthand from their points of view. And we're not allowed anymore to plead the ignorance of our naivete. We live in a world that has gotten increasingly complex and increasingly difficult to navigate with certainty. We have moved from a modern world to a postmodern world. And on my journey into my 60s, I have watched the world change all around me, and I have also watched the world change within me. When I finished graduate school and I entered into young adulthood, and as a young married man, as a young father, I promise you, I knew everything. I had been in school my whole life. They opened up my brain and poured in as much knowledge as I could consume. But it didn't take me long once I got out into the adult world, once I started to behave like a grown-up, when I found out that no one was asking the questions I had all the answers to. That the questions that people were asking were questions that I was ill-equipped to answer, because they were involving tragedy and chaos and uncertainty and mystery. And those equations of cause and effect, and good guys and bad guys, and black and white started to be dismantled. It's a normal part of, I think, our adult process, that we start off idealistic. It's a good thing. You have to start off in our youth looking at the world not as it is, but as it could be, as it should be, as it ought to be. And everyone in their 20s and their 30s hangs on to this idea that I'm going to change the world. I am going to make the world a better place. I will leave it better than when I found it. You have to have that idealism in your youth, or you would never leave your parents' basement. Because being a grown-up sucks. And adulting is hard work. And there are a lot of things that we run headlong into that are just not fair or right. And so as we venture into adulthood, some of those paradigms, the paradigms that I had, began to be dismantled. Let me just, on a side note, mention how proud I am to be a part of this community. Because this community is genuinely a 4-generation community. Every week we gather together and we have great-grandparents and grandparents and parents and children. We have people in micro-communities from every age group and stage of life. And the beauty of that is in that diversity, in that mosaic that includes that idealism and enthusiasm of youth that pushes us to examine, to ask why, to improve. There is also a tempering with the wisdom and the patience and the guidance of our elders. And we make each other better, and it's a fantastic blessing to be part of a community that is not monolithic generationally, but that we rub off on one another. But as I made my journey from youth to senior adulthood, I found that things inside of me changed. The world inside of me changed because the answers I thought I had didn't answer the problems anymore. In fact, I have come to believe that the more I know, the more I realize how little I know. And as I have grown and journeyed in this life, all of those presuppositions and all of those assumptions and many of those prejudices have been dismantled and challenged, and some no longer exist. And what I found was there's a whole lot fewer heroes in the world. There's a whole lot fewer people who get everything right. In fact, I have come to believe that there are no unflawed people. I have come to grow in my appreciation of grace because we are all lost at sea. We are all treading water in a limitless horizon without landmarks. We are living in a world where we could easily just swim in circles because all of the standard protocols, all of the rules, and all of the laws have been questioned, and the gray and the fog of life sweeps in over us. And it would be easy to be lost at sea. And I found myself many times questioning, what do I really believe? Because some of the things that I thought were hills worth dying for and fights worth fighting for were not at all that big a deal. But what I was searching for was there all along. What I found as I was treading through this postmodern sea, rearranging the priorities and the values within me, was what I found was something that had been there all along. I found that this was a life that was necessarily navigated by faith. And that the compass that I followed, the only true north that mattered, was the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. That when everything else fell to the wayside, I was anchored to this true north. I realized in the midst of the fog and the chaos, the uncertainty and the mystery of the world that I now find myself in, that Jesus is the Tao. Now, I apologize to any of you who have studied Chinese or speak Chinese. I know very little about it. I can recognize the character for the Tao. It's because I went on Wikipedia and they showed it to me. They said, this is what it looks like. And so as I studied the etymology of the Chinese word Tao, I found out a very interesting thing had happened over thousands of years of Eastern culture. The word originally meant a path or a road or the way, that the Tao was the path that you followed, but over thousands of years of philosophy and reflection on life, the Tao has come to mean something much deeper. It means the idea of the thing that connects all other things, of the underlying stabilizer of all of the world. It is, the Tao is the thing that holds the universe together. The Tao is that thing that makes sense when nothing else does. The Tao is the singular thing that explains life. So I was curious. I said, I wonder how the Chinese Bible translates the first chapter of the book of John. Because if there is a bold philosophical statement in the Bible, it is John 1:1. In John chapter 1, verse 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word. And in the New Testament, particularly in the writing of John, the Greek word logos, the word for word, has the same kind of meaning as Tao. It means the word, the thing that ties everything else together, that summarizes all things. In the beginning was the logos, and I looked in a Chinese translation, and I saw the character for the Tao. And the Chinese theologians who translated the New Testament said, in the beginning was the Tao. And it appears again, and the Tao was with God, and the Tao was God. And in verse 2, in the beginning, the Tao was with God from the beginning. So I thought, I wonder what John 14 says. Because if the Tao is the thing that is the way, if the Tao is the thing that pulls everything together, if the Tao is the underlying message behind the entire universe, what does John 14 say? John 14, Jesus is in the last days of his life, the last hours of his life, and he tells his disciples, don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? And if I prepare a place for you, I'm going to come again. And I'm going to take you to be with me so that where I am, you may also be. And then he says, I know you know the way where I am going. And there was the symbol for the Tao. You know the Tao where I am going. The story folds out there in John 14, and fortunately Thomas asks for all of us, hey, whoa, wait a minute. What do you mean we know the Tao? We don't even know where you're going. How can we know the Tao? And then in John chapter 14, verse 6, what we translate as the way has the Chinese character Tao. I am the Tao, the truth, and the life. And no man comes to the Father but through me. I am the Tao. I am the explanation of all things. I am the one thing that ties everything together. I am the force that motivates and empowers all other forces. I am the Tao. Now, I was taught, and I'm sure many of you were taught, that John 14:6 is a lesson in Christian exceptionalism. That it is written to us to remind us that the way to God is exclusively, uniquely, through the person of Christ. When he says, no man comes to the Father except through me, he is saying, this is the only hope that anyone has, is through me. Now, unfortunately, he does not elaborate on that. He doesn't tell us, well, maybe there's another way, a side door or a back door. He doesn't tell us, well, ultimately all the other ways funnel through me, and that's what I mean. I'm the Tao, and to understand God, you have to understand me. So anyone who understands God is actually understanding me. He doesn't unpack it enough for us to know anything except this. I promise you, if you follow me, I will get you home. I am the Tao, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And when you wonder about all of those other questions about what he meant here, he absolutely meant this one thing. If you follow me, I will get you home. You have my word on it. I promise you that. When he says, I am the Tao, when he says, I am the one who makes sense of the universe, we can understand it not just as I am the path, but I am the way you understand the world. I am the way you make sense of the chaos, of the uncertainty, of the mystery of the universe that we live in. I am the way to understand that because I am the Tao. I am the thing that was before all things. I am the force that influences every other force. That is who I am. So when he says, I am the truth, he's saying, I know the truth. When you don't know why, when you don't understand why things are happening, when we're painted into a corner of confusion, he says, I know the truth. I don't just know the truth about what is happening, I know why it's happening. When no one else knows us, when we are confused and we're trying to defend our choices and ourselves, he says, I know you. I know the truth about you. I am the truth. All truth is connected to me. And I am the life. We have a tendency to see a very narrow view of the salvation of God, that he saves us from a godless eternity, that he gives us life beyond this life. But the life he is promising us is a life of meaning right now. It is a life beyond the pointless existence. Because I am the Tao, I can show you a life that is filled with meaning. It is not the pursuit of meaningless accomplishments or accolades or applause. I can show you the way to life. That's where our journey is headed over the next 4 weeks. We're going to look at the Tao of Jesus, the Tao of purity, the way of his purity, the Tao of mercy, the Tao of humility, and the Tao of generosity. These things that if we incorporate them into our life, give our lives true substance and true meaning. He says, that's what I do. Because I am the Tao. I am the way we understand what is beyond our understanding. I am the way to make sense of the chaos and the confusion of the world that we live in. I am the Tao. For 10 years, it's estimated there were almost 100,000 scientists, most of them PhDs in advanced mathematics and physics, who were communicating, who were sharing theories, who were working together to design and to develop and to build what has now become what's called the Large Hadron Collider. Between 1998 and 2008, it's estimated that over 1,000 universities and 100 different countries provided professors and scientists and engineers to design and to develop this linear accelerator. It is 17 miles in length. It's buried 575 feet below the ground on the border of France and Switzerland, just outside of Geneva. And in the years that they have done experiments on the Large Hadron Collider, they have made literally trillions of calculations, networking the world's most elaborate computers to retrieve the data from the collisions, the billions and billions of collisions that they encourage every second in the experimental chambers of the Hadron Collider. All of this work, all of this labor, all of these billions of dollars is to find one thing. Basically, what they are searching for is space and time. What is the one thing that creates space and time? Because the mathematics tells us that there is a force. There is a force that influences every other force. In 1964, there were a group of physicists who won the Nobel Prize. The lead physicist was a man named Peter Higgs. He developed what was called particle theory. And their theory suggested that the universe is literally held together by forces greater than gravity, greater than electromagnetism, and that those forces were sourced in measurable, quantifiable particles, the most elusive of which they named for the physicist Peter Higgs. It's called the Higgs boson particle. The Large Hadron Collider has been searching for evidence of the reality of the particle that influences all other particles. It literally is the force that holds the universe together. It is the force that creates space and time. There was another Nobel laureate physicist who in 1993 wrote a book about the Large Hadron Collider and the history of particle theory. His name was Leon Lederman, and he wrote a book aptly titled The God Particle. And in it, he explains why he titled the book, which chronicles the search for the Higgs boson, why he titled that The God Particle. And here's what he said. This boson, the Higgs boson, is so central to the state of physics today, so crucial in our final understanding of the structure of matter, yet so elusive that I have given it a nickname, the God particle. Why did we call the book the God particle? Because there is a connection of sorts to another book, a much older one. And he's implying the Bible. He's saying what we are searching for is the force that influences every other force, the force that creates space and time itself. We call it the God particle. Mathematicians call it the grand unifying theory, the one equation from which all other equations are explained. Western philosophers for centuries have referred to it as natural law. The laws of nature, the immutable, unchangeable laws. Eastern philosophers have referred to this force that influences all other forces as the Tao. The Bible calls it the Logos. And Jesus said that would be me. I am the force that influences all other forces. I am the Tao. I am the way and the truth and the life. And the most amazing statement he could make, he makes in the next verse, where he says, if you really know me, you know my Father. You know the source of all things. And he says, from now on, you do know him. And you have seen him because you know me and you have seen me. I am the one who explains the way the universe works in a way that a human being can comprehend. I am the Tao. I am a thoroughly modern man. I love to break rules, but in a world without rules, what do you rebel against? It's frustrating for me. It's uncomfortable for me to live in a postmodern world. I'm so used to being analytical and empirical and saying, prove it to me, that uncertainty and ambiguity and the mystery of the world that we live in, the volumes of information that create that chaos and that complexity and confusion are frustrating for me. There was a philosopher and apologist, a professor of English literature, who in 1943 saw the postmodern shift coming. And he knew it would be dangerous for intellectuals like himself. He was a professor of English literature at Oxford. His name was C.S. Lewis. And in 1943, he wrote a series of essays warning the British higher education system, the professors in the Oxfords and Cambridges of the world, that this move toward postmodernism would threaten the very foundations of natural law. And in that series of essays, he put them together, there are 6 or 7 of them, they were published in 1943 as a book called The Abolition of Man. And in the first of his essays, he identifies the thing that the postmodern world is seeking to dismantle. And he says, don't do it. because he calls it the Tao. He says the Chinese speak of a great thing, the greatest thing, called the Tao. It is the reality beyond all predicates, the abyss that was before the Creator himself. It is nature. It is the way, the road. It is the way in which the universe goes on, the way in which things everlastingly emerge into space and time. Lewis saw the postmodern world coming, and he said the danger is a life with no moorings, a life with no boundaries, where there is no truth because there are no lies, where there is no good because there is no evil. And he said you cannot dismantle the Tao. The Tao must necessarily exist. There has to be a force that influences all the other forces, or the universe does not make sense. And if you know anything about C.S. Lewis, for him, the Tao was the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. When he talks about the Tao, he talks about the same thing that I'm talking about. My true north. Over the journey of my life to my ancient age, I have been changed. And I saw the world around me change. I saw the conventional wisdom be dismantled because new information was available. New discoveries were made. Volumes of experiences were made available to people all over the planet to actually experience what it's like to walk in another person's shoes. All of these experiences, all of this information has created a postmodern world. And that world has changed. I've watched it change around me. But I've also watched a change take place within me, where I've become less dogmatic and less certain of the answers to the questions. I don't see everything as a cause and effect. I realize that there are no more unflawed people, that we are all in desperate need of grace. And as I am treading water in this limitless horizon of an ocean, one without markers, my mooring remains one true north. The life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. He is the Tao. He is the guide in a world without any. In a world of uncertainty and gray, he is the Tao. You'll notice that I have turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. And you are free to intellectually roam about the cabin. You are free to interact with your fellow passengers, to argue and debate what we're talking about in these weeks. You will notice as we travel that we will do a flyby on purity and on mercy and on humility, that we will wave at generosity as we pass by. Over each side of our journey, you will notice the landmarks of our progress. You may occasionally feel some bumpiness, and it may create some anxiety in you, and you're welcome. I would recommend, if you are seated, that you fasten your seatbelt tightly around you and hold on in case there just is some unsettledness in our journey. But I can promise you this. We will get there exactly on time. We will not be a moment late, and we will not be a moment early. So thank you for flying with us. We know you have many choices on your spiritual journey, and I am personally very glad that you have chosen to make this journey into the Tao with me. Welcome aboard.